There's a plant growing in almost every backyard in North America right now. For thousands of years, more than 200 indigenous tribes treated it as a primary food source, ground its seeds into flour, and harvested its leaves by the basket. Modern agriculture treats the same plant as one of the most common agricultural weeds, and most people walk past it every day without recognizing what it is. The disconnect between those two views, sacred staple and unwanted weed, is the story of this video, because both views are based on real evidence. This is Dr. Kenzo longevity. In 1973, archaeologists excavating Cahokia, the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico, found something that rewrote the history of North American agriculture. Cahokia, at its peak, in roughly 1100 AD, held a population larger than London at the same time. The city was supported by an agricultural system that researchers are still trying to fully understand. That system included far more than the famous three sisters of corn, beans, and squash, with several additional seed crops grown alongside them in carefully managed rotations. In storage pits beneath the ancient city, they uncovered thousands of charred seeds, deliberately stored, processed, and dated to between roughly 700 and 1500 AD. The seeds were not corn, not beans, not squash, the three crops most people assume defined indigenous agriculture in the region. They were seeds from a plant in the same broad botanical family that later gave the world quinoa, a relative the Indian civilizations independently domesticated. The Cahokians had been cultivating this plant in massive quantities, grinding the seeds into flour and using it as a primary grain crop centuries before corn arrived from Mexico. The volume of stored seeds at the site indicates this was not a famine fallback or a wild-gathered supplement. It was a deliberately farmed staple grown at agricultural scale. Similar storage caches and processing tools have been found at sites across the Mississippi and Missouri River valleys, suggesting the practice extended well beyond Cahokia itself. Closely related species were cultivated independently in the Andes, in Mexico, in China, and in the Himalayas, on every inhabited continent except Australia and Antarctica. This was not a marginal food. It was one of a handful of plants that ancient agriculture societies on multiple continents independently chose to domesticate. The Lakota called the plant the bear's spinach. The Cherokee had their own name for it, and the Hopi treated it as sacred food. The Haudenosaunee included it as a companion crop in their gardens, and similar respectful names existed across most plains and woodlands tribes. When Lewis and Clark crossed the continent in 1805, they recorded that women in plains tribes harvested seeds from this plant by the basket load each autumn. The seed heads were beaten into containers, winnowed like wheat, and stored in underground caches that could feed a village through winter. The leaves were eaten fresh in summer, dried for storage, and added to stews and pottages when other vegetables were not available. European settlers eventually noticed what indigenous people had known for millennia. During the Irish potato famine in the 1840s, families across Ireland survived in part by gathering this plant from fields and hedgerows when other food sources failed. In Ukraine during the famine of 1932, villagers gave it a name that translated roughly to lifesaver, and ate it daily when grain harvests collapsed. Swedish and Finnish peasants knew it as a backup crop during bad harvests, called by a name in their languages that meant something close to mealwort. During the Second World War, the United States Department of Agriculture included this plant in some Victory Garden manuals as a recommended source of vitamins when commercial vegetables were rationed. The pattern was consistent across cultures. This plant became visible during food crises and then receded back into obscurity once normal agriculture recovered. A caveat up front, this video is not promising that this plant cures anything or solves food security on its own. It is a real and useful food plant with real nutritional density, and it is also a plant that requires accurate identification because some lookalikes are toxic. The science is genuinely interesting, but the practical use requires more care than the typical online video suggests. Quick thing before we go further, if this kind of breakdown is what you have been looking for, subscribe and hit the bell. There is a new video on this channel every day on the next strange thing your body is doing right now. Now back to the nutritional profile, because once you see the numbers, you understand why so many cultures independently relied on this plant. The leaves contain measurable amounts of vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin K, calcium, iron, magnesium, potassium, and several B vitamins. By weight, the leaves consistently test higher in vitamin A and vitamin C than commercial spinach, though the exact ratios vary by growing conditions and plant maturity. The iron content is particularly notable for a green vegetable, and it comes paired with vitamin C, which improves the bioavailability of plant-based iron during digestion. The protein content of the leaves is in the range of 3 to 4% fresh weight, which is high for a leafy green. Comparisons to meat or quinoa require careful attention to whether you are looking at fresh weight numbers or dry weight numbers, since the two diverge dramatically. The seeds themselves contain roughly 13 to 16% protein by weight, comparable to many cultivated grains, with a complete amino acid profile. That last detail is important. Most plant proteins are limited by at least one amino acid, but this plant provides all 9 essential amino acids the human body cannot manufacture. The same family also contains betalains, a class of antioxidant pigments that are otherwise rare outside of beets, and that have been studied for their inflammatory and metabolic effects. Quick question before we go deeper. Tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. The biology of this plant is roughly the same everywhere, but local names and culinary traditions vary enormously, and what people in your region call it may surprise you. And if you have not subscribed yet, this is the moment. The question of why an entire continent forgot a primary food crop is genuinely interesting once you understand the mechanics behind agricultural change. There is one more piece of context worth covering before I name the plant, which is why it has been studied recently for climate adaptation. The same characteristics that made this plant valuable in pre-industrial agriculture are exactly what climate researchers now look for in candidate crops. Drought tolerance, growth in poor soil, and no need for fertilizer or pesticides are the qualities that determine which plants can adapt to warming climates and degraded land. Research stations in Africa, in Asia, and in the southwestern United States have been studying members of this plant family as potential food security crops for arid and salty soils. The plant grows in conditions where wheat fails, where corn collapses, and where most cultivated vegetables cannot survive a single dry season. It produces tens of thousands of seeds per plant, each viable for years, which means it reseeds itself without intervention once established. And it produces all of this nutritional density without irrigation, without fertilizer, without pesticides, and without any of the inputs that modern agriculture treats as essential. That combination of properties is genuinely unusual. It is one of the reasons agricultural researchers have begun looking at this plant again after roughly a century. For most of that century, it was treated as a problem to spray rather than a crop to study. That framing is finally being reconsidered in serious nutrition and agronomy circles, where the plant is now appearing in proposals for sustainable food security programs. The plant has several common names in English, the most widespread being lamb's quarters, sometimes spelled as one word, sometimes with an apostrophe. The botanical name of the most widespread species is Chenopodium album, and it is found across temperate climates on every inhabited continent. The North American species the Cahokians actually cultivated was Chenopodium berlandieri, a closely related plant that has been mostly replaced by the European import in modern fields. Both species are edible, both are nutritionally similar, and both are now treated as weeds in mainstream American agriculture. The shift from food crop to weed did not happen by accident, and it did not happen overnight. The actual story is more about agricultural economics than about anything mysterious. By the early 1900s, American agriculture was consolidating around a small number of high-yield monoculture crops, primarily wheat, corn, and soybeans. Any plant that competed with those crops for water, sunlight, or soil nutrients became an economic problem, regardless of whether it was edible. Lamb's quarters is fast-growing, aggressive, and outcompetes young row crops easily, which makes it a classic agronomic weed by definition, even though humans can eat it. By the 1950s, the agricultural chemical industry had developed selective herbicides designed to kill broadleaf plants while leaving grass crops intact. Lamb's quarters became one of the primary targets for those herbicides, not because anyone classified it as worthless food, but because it was reducing corn and wheat yields. The honest framing is that nobody actively suppressed knowledge of this plant. The plant simply did not fit the economic model of modern agriculture. A non-patentable plant that reseeds itself, grows without inputs, and can be harvested by anyone is incompatible with an industry built on annual seed purchases and chemical inputs. There is no villain in this story, just a 100-year shift in what counted as a useful plant and what got pushed to the margins of agricultural attention. The same pattern applies to several other genuinely useful wild plants that used to be common knowledge and that almost no one in modern cities can identify anymore. That is not a conspiracy, it is just how markets work. The result is that several genuinely useful plants have been pushed out of mainstream awareness over the last century, even when there was no intent to suppress them. Quick thing, what I just covered is the surface. There's a complete protocol that takes everything you just heard and turns it into something you actually do every day. It is called Reset, the 14-day brain reboot. Day-by-day instructions, exact dosages, timing windows, and the science behind each one explained the same way I just walked through nutritional density. Built around the same biological systems covered on this channel, micronutrient sufficiency, metabolic markers, and the daily routines that support these systems. The 14-day timeline is structured so you can measure your own changes, energy, digestion, and general resilience as visible indicators. Less than $10 for the entire protocol, less than the cost of a single coffee per day across 2 weeks, with lifetime access included automatically. First link in the description below this video, but stay here, because how to actually identify and use lamb's quarters is what matters most. Here is how to identify lamb's quarters correctly, because this is the part where people most often make mistakes. The leaves are roughly diamond-shaped or triangular, with small irregular teeth along the edges, and they get larger and more lobed as the plant matures. The most distinctive feature is a fine white powder on the underside of young leaves, and on the growing tips, which feels slightly waxy when rubbed between fingers. The stems are often streaked with red, pink, or purple lines running along their length, especially in older plants. The flowers are small, clustered tightly in green or gray-green spikes at the top of the plant. They are not showy in any way, which is part of why most people walk past the plant entirely without ever noticing it as anything other than green background. The seeds mature in late summer and early fall, turning from green to glossy black and falling easily from the stem when ripe. Important point, never harvest a plant unless you're confident in the identification, because there are lookalikes in the same family that can cause problems. Use a reliable plant identification guide for your region, or consult a local forager before consuming anything you have collected from the wild. There are also safety considerations specific to lamb's quarters that responsible sources mention, and viral videos usually skip. The leaves contain oxalates, the same compounds found in spinach and charred, which can interfere with calcium absorption, and which people prone to kidney stones should consume cautiously. The plant also accumulates nitrates from the soil, which is why heavily fertilized fields can produce lamb's quarters with higher nitrate levels than is ideal for regular consumption. For most people, occasional or moderate consumption of lamb's quarters from clean, uncontaminated areas is perfectly safe. Daily large servings should be approached with the same caution as daily large servings of spinach, because both plants accumulate oxalates in measurable amounts. Quick observation. If you have made it this far, you already understand more about forgotten food plants than 90% of adults. The reset protocol takes that understanding and gives it shape over 14 days, first link in the description, less than $10 for the complete sequence. And if this kind of breakdown is what you have been looking for, subscribe. Now stay with me, because how to use this plant practically is the last piece. Here's how to actually use lamb's quarters once you have correctly identified it. The young leaves can be used anywhere you would use spinach, raw in salads, sautéed with garlic, added to soups, or stirred into stews near the end of cooking. They can also be blended into smoothies or added to omelets and frittatas, the same way you might use baby spinach in your kitchen already. The taste is milder than spinach, slightly nutty, with less of the metallic edge that some spinach varieties have, and most people who try it prefer it to commercial spinach. The seeds are processed similarly to quinoa or amaranth, rinsed to remove any surface compounds, then cooked in water for 15 to 20 minutes until tender. The seeds can also be ground into flour for use in baking, although most home cooks find the leaves more practical for everyday use than the seeds. One mature plant in a garden produces enough leaves for steady weekly use through the growing season, and the same plant produces enough seeds to start a new generation next year, which means once you have one established, you do not need to buy seeds again. 3 common mistakes to avoid before changing anything tomorrow morning. Mistake 1. Harvesting from fields treated with herbicides or fertilizers, because both leave residues that defeat the purpose of using a clean wild food source. Mistake 2. Treating any Chenopodium species as automatically safe, since accurate species identification still matters for clean nutrition. Mistake 3. Eating very large quantities daily, which can produce the same oxalate and nitrate considerations that apply to any concentrated leafy green. One thing before this video closes, the broader lesson here is about how much practical knowledge about edible plants has narrowed in the last century. Most Americans can identify roughly 5 edible plants in their environment, while the average person in pre-industrial Europe or North America could identify dozens. That knowledge gap is recent and fixable. Lamb's quarters is one of the simplest places to start, because it grows almost everywhere, is easy to learn to recognize, and is genuinely useful as ordinary food. If this video clicked for you, subscribe. There is a new video on this channel every day on the next strange thing your body is doing right now. And if you want the full Reset 14-day protocol, day by day, with dosages and timing, first link below. Less than $10, less than a single coffee per day for 2 weeks. Your body is running software that has not been updated in 200,000 years. Tomorrow's video is about something connected to everything we just covered. It works on the same nutritional density principle, but in a direction you will not expect. It is also something already growing within walking distance of most people watching this video, just hiding in plain sight under another familiar name. That is next.